Hi, let me welcome you to the last public lecture for the summer school this year. There might be like a few more things happening that units are curating. But I'm really, really pleased to introduce Leonidas Traboukis from Objects of Common Interest and LOT. I'm going to explain in a second these kind of two different accolades. Here at the summer school, we're dealing with a lot of things, tiny things, huge things, ideas that materialize down at the workshop, ideas that materialize in some sort of huge map somewhere. And I thought that kind of scalelessness of architecture is very well represented in the work of LOT and Objects of Common Interest. So Leonidas and Eleni Petalotti founded LOT Architects and eventually also founded Objects of Common Interest, which are kind of two parallel endeavors that kind of intersect with architecture quite literally, quite metaphorically, understanding how an architect can think around an object, can think around materiality, can think around scale. So I've invited them to share with us their process, to share with us how they kind of think around problems, how they create problems to solve, how they produce them. They have their own workshop that specializes in casting large scales resin objects. And also I've asked them to also share with us some of the work that they've done with Columbia University master's students at the AAD program, where we all graduated from, and where I had the pleasure to come after them. They were the year before me. So join me in welcoming Leonidas.
Thank you, Sophia. And nice to meet you all. It's very nice to be here after I've been here a long time ago. And it's a nice, good summer day. I'll start with a bit of introduction. So our studio is shared between myself and my partner, Eleni. And we have a group of about 15 people who work between Greece, Athens, and New York. We have a complicated, not a complicated, but a particular situation. We are split. We split both our personal lives and our professional lives between New York and Athens, and that's intentional, but also it has become almost like a reason why our work has evolved like that. It evolves at two different speeds, and this is why we have these two identities. The speed of architecture and the speed of other things are different, and although we started doing architecture, we still do architecture, but we have established this studio Object of Common Interest where we work between objects, installations, public art, spaces, environments. For us, it's a ground for experimentation. We self-initiate a lot of ideas, and that the two studios, one feeds the other. Architectural speed is more slow, and it's now that we're starting to implement some of these ideas that you see in the presentation into architecture. Because with architecture, it's very hard to choose your path. And you have to have a fertile ground to bring some ideas and do it your way. We also launched recently, about a year and a half ago, a fabrication studio in Athens, where we specialize and produce large-scale pieces for art and design with resin. It's a new experiment. It came out of complete coincidence that we acquired, and we inherited this studio from a master of resin who we used to work with in New York, and we shipped all the pieces to shipping containers in Athens, and we set up this big space, and now we're experimenting in these kind of works. So we produce our works in resin. Lectures like this for us is also an opportunity to think of our work in a different way, and every time we prepare this kind of presentation, we add one more element in our process, and maybe we step out a little bit and see things differently. Static performance is a term that is not an official manifesto or something, but it's something that we recently started thinking about in explaining what we do, or not what we do in physical, but how we think of things. It rejects the idea that something that we do is purely utilitarian, although it's an object or a building or a space. We're interested in the interactive approach of something and how it becomes alive when it's built or materialized and when it's populated with people around. And it still maintains an artistic practice, but it's also something that goes beyond just utility. And this is where our interest lies in. So I structured this presentation out of certain kind of like themes or terms that we have usually used in our ideas. Is not things we follow closely, but it's things that are at the back of our heads every time. We never really copy or copy-paste, let's say, projects that we've done, and you might not see formally same things, but these are underlying ideas that somehow explain our projects. I'll start by one of our very first ones, because I really feel this is where things started off for us. This is the Design Talks Theater in Design Miami. I don't remember the date, but it's, I think, back in 2017. Where we were invited to create a temporary theater for the Design Miami talks with a very quick deadline and in a very intense environment. This place would have talks for 200 people, some other day maybe for 10 people, some other day there will be informal conversations here and there. And this is where the idea of objects came in for us for the first time. We thought, we were architects in training, and instead of doing what has been done in the past years at Design Miami, building a plywood stepped auditorium and making a formal theater, we thought about this as an installation for the first time. So we designed a bunch of furniture. We don't call them furniture, we call them objects, and that are light. They were able to be moved around, not with wheels, but with just move them or push them. And everybody would be able to improvise by moving them here and there and set up different situations for making these talks be full. By full meaning that you would never see the space completely empty if it were a small group, because you would have a cluster of a talk in one corner, and then the rest of the objects were just there. And we clad all the perimeter around with mirrors so that it became an environment. And this is another term that you'll see later on. By environment, we mean that this is not just a space that you sit and focus on the element that it's happening. It's a space that you want to be in, and just by being in the space, it gives you something. It makes you something. So this is something that later on we always kept coming back and back in our minds, that we want to create spaces that are not just spaces. There are more layers of reading. Another project that was about the same idea, it happened in Athens. It was again during a design fair, Art Athena, and we had to deal with this modernist building, one of the first and most important examples of Bauhaus architecture in Athens, where we had this huge building with this array of columns. And we wanted to introduce something in this, like bring in some elements that would be seating. We were invited to present the seating installation in the entrance of that space. So we created this light-looking but very heavy. Actually, they couldn't be moved easily. Bent steel tube clusters of elements that contrasted with this blue, the blue color contrasted with the white of the marble-clad building. And then what happened is that because it was an art fair, nobody was sitting. Everybody was coming, looking, taking pictures and going in. And then the children started coming. And then it was the children that activated the space, because the children have no filter, and they started playing around, jumping, and then people started understanding that this is something that can be touched. And that gave us this idea that of an ambiguity. The ambiguity means that things can have various different uses, and it's not necessarily, without a label. It's not art, it's not design, it's not architecture, it's objects. And the idea of playfulness means that something is not static, that you don't see it. It becomes, and that's the term static performance, it becomes alone, it becomes something more than a setup. We've explored these ideas in competitions. This was a competition for the Chicago Biennale a few years ago, where we had this. The concept was a pavilion in the park. We designed 3 elements that were each one was a different use. An oval, a rectangular, and a trapezoidal shape. One was a performance space, one was a bar, the other one was a bookstore or a library. But the 3 were in wheels, and they would be able to be moved around and have a different configurations. And the only thing that was holding them together was this mesh that was a drape above. This was one of the first projects where we started thinking in architectural scale in a similar way, in a way that things are not there to be built permanently. They're there to be experienced in many different ways according to the use and according to the context. This is a commission by a company called Kvadrat. It's a Danish company of fabrics. And that was a project that was presented in Milan, in Salone, and in 3 days of design in Copenhagen. We were invited together with about 20 international designers to use their fabrics and do anything we wanted, but the brief was something you've never done before. So we started thinking about our roots and our history, and we wanted to bring this Greek element in play, but not in a kitsch way, but in something that was a surprise. So we thought about these fabrics. Usually you see fabric as something that is tangible and you touch it, but how can you make that surprising? How you make that appear something different than what it is? So we came up with this concept of the Greek columns, and we dressed different compartments of the column in fabrics in certain ways that when they rotate, there's a choreography and they start dancing. And they were installed. One was static, one in different ways, and there was a motion sensor that would grab the movement of people around, and they would start spinning in different directions, creating sculptures in space, but every time different depending on the speed and depending on the consistency of the fabric. For us, every year there is we present projects in Milan and at the Salone, the furniture fair, and there is this platform that maybe you're familiar with. It's called Alcova. It started as a side fair, but it became very quickly a very important ground for designers, for artists, for brands to showcase ideas and to become kind of like a ground for experimentation. So we've been going there every year trying to, and this is where we kind of think of new things and new ideas to experiment with. We've been using inflatables for the past few years, and Alcova is an interesting place for us to experiment with ideas of structures that are objects themselves. They have the scale of public, but then they become places for engagement, places for community, places for conversations, for sitting, communal elements. So this was one of them last year, where we had this inflatable pavilion that would inflate and deflate based on how many people were up there, and it was changing its shape. And when many people were on, it was becoming flat. When it was not many people, it was going up again. So it was transforming from a sculpture to a sitting and back and forth. So a term that often we have in mind is this idea of gathering, but gathering not in an architectural way that we have a space that we sit all together and we have dinner, we sit, we drink, but gathering more of this being a place for contemplation, a place where people can be grouped together, but when somebody can be alone as well. a competition for a temporary bar or restaurant in Belgium. It was in the grounds of a design fair, where we used scrap parts of marble by local marble companies, and we wanted to arrange them in a way that there is a flat, huge table that becomes a space, and it has all these bits and pieces of grooves that you could sit alone or in groups, but in different types of formations, and it was creating these micro environments. And most of these ideas, it's very important, the ideas that you don't realize, because sometimes they're always there, they're always in the back of your mind, and they will find their ground to come up and then become realized in certain ways. Maybe not in the same idea. We'd never reused an idea that didn't move forward formally. We reused the concept of it, but never the actual design. One of our most important first projects that we realized in that public realm was in New York, in the middle of Manhattan, in Flatiron Plaza, where we won a competition to design a temporary, for maybe 4 months, sculpture that was not art, not design. It was a placemaker. It was, the brief was that give us something that will be there as an attraction, as a reflection of New York social life, and as a node to the city. We created these illuminated arches made of steel, custom bent steel. It was a very complicated fabrication that we did with a fabrication group in Chicago. And then there were hammocks hanging, and people would be able to come there and hang out alone or hang out in groups. It really became an attraction. It was installed in November in a freezing year in New York, but you could see people hanging out there for hours in the freezing cold, reading books. So this kind of activation of space gave us the urge to continue doing these kind of projects that are, maybe they look like they don't make sense, like hammocks in the winter, but it's not about the utility of a space only. It's about also the concept and how the feeling that it produces when you're there and around. So these arches were welded like tree branches with insane city municipality requirements for everything that you could possibly think of. And it was a very important project for us in terms of realizing a public piece of art that is at the same time an architectural space. This is a project in Bergamo in Italy. It is the project that was part of the celebrations of Bergamo being the Italian cultural capital of Italy 2 years ago. And it is a large-scale public installation that is still up there after 2 years, although it was supposed to be temporary. And for us, it goes under this umbrella of placemaking. How do you treat a public space, an important public space, with a temporary structure that is there to offer meaning and offer community without this being necessarily something that is used. This was a very rigid building in a very unused plaza for years. And one of the briefs that we received was to create something that will revive this plaza, that will bring people there and engage the community. So we created this custom bent acrylic tubes with a hidden steel structure inside that was complicatedly attached to the ground of the building. And it was like light drawings in space. So this has become a language of ours that we started exploring as objects, as like actual physical lighting elements. But now we have been dealing with this as installations, because we've seen the value of there is a very important element of light and what light makes you feel when you see it during the day, the passing of the day. And it's almost like a moving element. this, we call them tube lights. It's part of the permanent collection of Maxim Museum in Rome right now, and we're exploring further ideas of how this concept can be adapted to places that and give meaning and give temporary activations to certain areas. This is part of the Athens Theatre Festival this year. The idea of community when it comes to architecture, and basically now this project is an interior project. It's we had this commission to create a strategy for a brand called Devotion in New York. It's a Colombian coffee brand that came with a very specialty element in New York to open multiple locations. So we've worked with them to create the strategy of how their architectural identity will evolve, and that came from their Colombian background of street life, and we created a big presentation with them. But the project that we developed here was the idea of informality in a very formal concept. So we thought about an island that was we would bring in lush vegetation of Colombian plants and create a very simplistic space where the only element is this kind of like big platform in the middle of the space where people will be able to sit informally. And we wanted to bring this informality in a place that usually it's more rigid. Another competition in New York for a landmark element in Chinatown. We worked together with a group of artists from London, actually, United Artists. And it's a big canopy with an interesting lighting element inside, where it would be located in the middle of Canal Street in downtown Manhattan, and it creates this landmark again. This idea of landmark of bringing together the community in a very, very busy crossroad. We're very interested in this element of creating activation in public space. And we were invited in Alcova again 2 years ago to create a self-initiated idea in a new location. They change location every year. And we wanted to bring, we got a reference from the European fountain that is at the same time a landmark, but also a place for gathering. But this was a temporary installation, so we wanted to bring something in that we will be able to remove afterwards. So we thought again about the idea of inflatable. The inflatable for us, it started becoming something that it's a language of identity for us because of it's able to be transported. So we created this inflatable fountain where it came actually in one suitcase. We set it up. We had an extractor of water. We plugged it into the local municipal water hose. And for 2 weeks, for 1 week in April, we had a plaza in the middle of this abandoned industrial location where the Alcova was running. This is a competition in Greece, in Thessaloniki, where we won. We did a collaboration with two large architecture firms in France, Lina Gotme and LAN Architects, for a conference center in the middle of my hometown, Thessaloniki, and we had the chance to win the second prize for one of the largest and most important conference places in centers in Greece. The idea was again that we create this large scale. It was an immense building, but we wanted to the goal was to create a pavilion in the park idea, hidden, as much hidden as possible, but at the same time a group, kind of like an attractor and a space where thousands of people would be able to gather. And we achieved that by having that all made in the roof. So at eye level, it was a sensitive for the environment, for the urban scale project. And once you come up and you go above, then it becomes a big public square. A while ago, we were selected to be part of the Wallpaper Architects Directory in 2014. And with a Wallpaper Magazine initiative, we set up a workshop in the mountains of Jura in Switzerland with all the participants of that competition. And we were working with a local municipal campsite to create a series of architectural interventions in the forest for a municipal campsite. And this was an elevated object in space, like a UFO, that had this large net in the middle that was becoming let's say, the living room of the campsite. There would be different campsites around the area, and that would be their, let's say, the public building of the campsite. It was an elevated wood frame structure that we started working with a local University of Wood Technology in the area, and the students there were working on the construction documents of how to fabricate and further on realize it. It came right before pandemic, so it's something unfortunate that maybe will never continue. Scale is also one of these terms that somehow we always have in mind, and we are a lot informed by children how children activate space. We have 2 young children, 3 and 7, and after seeing them involved in our works, we have been changed our way of seeing things and the way we see the concept of playfulness, the concept of activation, and the concept of just improvisation. And it's a very important element of how we design things that are not necessarily dictating specific use. This was a proposal for a Lexus. The car company had a space in New York that wanted to create kind of like a talks room, the size of this room more or less. And we came up with this idea of these oversized toys, children toys, like the ones that children are stacking, that people will be able again to move around and create their own conditions. We ended up, this is one of the few projects that we realized in a different context. We ended up making these out of these techniques that you see here, and was presented in a gallery setting, and then in an installation setting as well. This was in Carwan Gallery in Athens, at the port of Athens a couple of years ago. Similar ideas of scale are important because scale is very important in how you perceive a public element, and it's not very easy to do scalable things that are easy transportable. So the inflated for us is something that we keep exploring in how we create the illusion that something is permanent and heavy, but in reality it fits in one suitcase. This was a proposal for let's say, labyrinthian installation at the ADO space in Greenpoint in New York. And a starting point for us to create inflatable works that are at the same time objects and create space. This was a show at the Brussels Design Museum in Brussels a few years ago, where we created this one-off pieces that are at the same time that they look like they're made of glass, but they're very light and are able to sway a little bit in the wind. So again, it's not that it's the environment that they create when you're around these kind of objects that you feel that they're static, but then you can go and touch them and they start moving and start reacting with you. It's what gives the impression of a performance, but in reality, it's a static installation. The concept for this was coming from the Cycladic art, where you have these figurines of one of the first, most important ancient figurines in Greece that are actually so tiny, some of them. And then this is where the scale is of importance, because it's something that you don't really understand the scale of things and the tactability of things until you see them in person. Later on, we were invited to do a show at the KMG. It's the Contemporary Art Museum of Hamburg in Germany, with curator Maria Cristina Dideiro. and we came up with this idea of tea houses. These were 3 inflatable structures that were inviting people to come in and interact in unprecedented ways. It was in the middle of the pandemic, so we had this concept of togetherness and individuality, where you could come in one space and interact with your peers, but in a protective way. This is an exhibition designed for the German Design Council that we presented in Milan, where the concept of scale was that of creating tension within an dense interior environment for presenting an installation. We're presenting the German Design Awards, and we blew up inflatable elements that were squeezed in this small apartment in Milan, in creating moments of activation and moments of focus. The idea of enclosure is something that interests us also in architecture, and now we are in preparation of a few projects for residential houses that deal with the blurriness of the boundaries between inside and outside. It's very interesting to have the feeling of being inside, but at the same time being outside. And this concept of enclosure it comes also from our inflatable work, that it's something that you create an environment outside, but then it becomes a completely different project when it's in interior space. This is a beach club in Greece, in the island of Corfu, where we had it's open air, but we had one big element, a big roof that was covering and hosting multiple kind of like programs at the same time: a beach club, a restaurant, a cafe, an exhibition space. So this all in an outdoor environment. We had these mesh curtains that would open and close. So you still have the idea of transparency, but then it becomes when they're closed, they keep the feeling of privacy, but at the same time understanding the space all at once. One of the first architectural competitions that we won a prize in, it was for a school in Finland. That was a very big public building. It was 11,000 square meters building in I think in the town of Tampere, sorry. And it's a project that first came for us, some of these ideas together: scale, enclosure, playfulness. Finland is one of the most progressive countries in educational buildings, and they really advance their architectural briefs in such a way that they allow for a lot of room for experimentation. We created this iconic round building at the edge of a new town, where the streets were the corridors, and the buildings were the classrooms, in this kind of like a Team 10 homage to Bethnal Green, like a Streets in the Air. And it was a school at the same time for a kindergarten all the way to high school. So we gave this building a big slope, and at the lower part was the kindergarten. So the scale was becoming smaller when the kids and the heights of the kids were becoming smaller. And then where the building was taller, then it was for the bigger kids, for the auditoriums, for the public programs. So the building seemed scale according to the use. And there was this kind of informality of the educational process extending out to the streets, and the whole building was an enclosure that was becoming an object in space. This is another project for Art Athena, and a temporary pavilion for one exhibition session a few years ago, installed outside in the grounds. Like it was the same condition like the blue elements that you saw earlier, but this was a project for personal kind of like a contemplation. It was again dealing with these issues of enclosure, but at the same time, it was a place where one or more people would be able to go in and be together. In the architectural projects, this is a house that's under finishing construction now in Greece, and we thought about this element in a domestic space. There was a space within a space within a space. It's a rural house out in the fields, and we wanted to give the sense of urbanity and the sense of belonging in a space where you could do anything. So we came up with this platform where we create the urban environment with a plaza and an atrium inside, and the house is expanded around it. And then the rest of the landscape becomes a field. In a sense, giving identity to a location that has no identity, and creating urbanity for people, the clients, the people who came from the city into the suburbs to be for the need of more space. It's finishing now. I think this summer is they're moving in. And with this idea, the term of abstraction is something that comes from how one studio fits the other. With the object design, we have the chance to be able to create self-initiated ideas, more abstract, more quick, and we are now extending that concept to architecture and how we are trying to create buildings. And in the case of the previous one and some others, we're working now of how do we bring these ideas into this in different scale, where we have so many parameters, so many restrictions in terms of clients, in terms of constructability, in terms of regulations. I'm flipping through some ideas of where for us abstraction is something that it's not just a shape, it's not just a simplicity of a shape, it's a simplicity of a concept. That this is a proposal for the Tampa Museum of Contemporary Art in Florida, where we're invited to present right before COVID an installation of this window up there, where we created a seating element, where at the same time it's a contemplation platform that you see across the river, and then this iconic shape, this iconic lit circle is visible from all around. It's a response to a building, it's a response to a specific site, but at the same time it's a response to our own ideas and our own concept that we carry from project to project. Further concepts about proposals for buildings, and this is a gallery in Berlin for a private collector that was housing one large-scale sculpture of one Japanese artist, and we wanted to create these two gestures, one of the entrance and one of the light, for this one single gallery that was inside this building. This is a residential project in Brooklyn, in New York, where we had the task to renovate an existing building, but we want for a group of for a couple of artists, and with few means, we wanted to create this environment where it is where is expressed this concept for us of abstraction, making one single color, all exterior. It's something that stands out as an object, and this is one of the first projects we started seeing architecture as object as well. This is a student housing project in Thessaloniki, Greece, a ground-up new construction, where we had to deal with very restrictive regulations for how to build in a historic center, where we were being forced actually by the authorities to blend in, to create something that's created, let's say, next to it. So our idea of blending in was that of taking some historic elements of the balcony and the extrusion, but then presenting them in a completely contrasting environment, like a UFO that's landed in between the two buildings. So by doing that, the building not just stands out, but at the same time it becomes a historic reference, but in a very abstract, contemporary way. This is another house under construction in northern Greece, where we experiment and we explore ideas of rawness. This will be an exposed concrete building where it's a conversation with the landscape. It's a very small element, very small kind of like floor plan, and then the circulation, you can circulate around it and within it, let's say no boundaries. This is one of these series of elements that we see again, this concept come in an architectural scale that we're just exploring, and we're looking forward to see how we will continue. In our studio in Athens, we produce exclusive pieces of resin, and this for us becomes a place to further extend this. This is a material that we call opal, and it's a unique kind of like a resin recipe that we have worked together with this fabricator in New York who we acquired and inherited the studio from. And it has this beautiful uniqueness of blending colors like a iridescent way. But in a very unpredictable, we cannot control how the colors or how this will come around. So this idea of atmosphere comes from our idea not to control everything. And this follows our process. We tend to create things in this scale that we go from sketches to fabrication. We most often don't produce mock-ups. We don't produce tests. We follow our guts and we follow our intuition, and we let the studio, we let the material dictate, and we accept how it comes out at the end. And every project is a new project, so whatever we want to correct, we go after the next one. This was a major show we did at Nilufar Gallery in Milan, where we saw this space. It's called Nilufar Depot as an environment that we presented this series of singular monomaterial pieces, presenting at the same time the pieces, but also the whole setup as an installation. The concept of ambiguity, and closing almost with a few next objects, is that what I mentioned just now, that we don't really want to dictate always the use of this. This was a shelving system for a gallery that we work with, Chambers Gallery in Buenos Aires, where we created this series of metal elements that things were snapping in with magnets. So you had the horizontal plates and the columns, and we were able to create multiple different configurations of the same from the same elements to create all kinds of structures and all kinds of objects. So for us, flexibility is not the idea of adapting to a place, is the idea of the concept expanding to ways that you have not thought before and that you cannot control. This is another project for a house that's now under construction in a Greek island, where you start seeing these kind of geometries, alternating geometries come in place. When we start an architecture project like that, for us it's we see it sometimes as an object design, not in a formalistic way, but in a conceptual way. We try to stick so consistently with an idea that we have in mind in the beginning, and we try to adapt without kind of sacrificing the strength and the boldness of that initial concept. This is a restaurant that we recently completed in Athens. It's a restaurant owned by an art collector, so we had the chance to be able to see this not as a restaurant, but see this as a collection of experiences and environments, kind of like a walk through elements that each one seems maybe unfitting, but together they create a cohesive and almost like an abstract environment. We custom designed the chairs. These are all stainless steel chairs with a kind of a gel. This is it's not resin, the pillow. It's a gel that is semi-smooth. It's very, very heavy, but it has the feeling that it's not a cushion. So this idea of illusion sometimes appears in many of our concepts, that you feel that something is hard, and then when you start using it, you understand actually, and it takes time for you to experience, to kind of appreciate this tactileness and this kind of gentle gestures. In closing, the concept of memory is something that for us is important, because we not memory in terms of things that we have done and then we come back again and again, but things are slowly come from our childhood years or from our roots. We've been in New York for 18 years and we've never left Greece, but somehow we always have this one kind of like element of ours, bringing elements from our backgrounds in a more abstract way. This year in Milan, we worked with the Greek government, and we brought together 9 of the biggest marble making companies and quarries in Greece to, for the first time, present an installation using Greek marble. It was a very hard project because all these companies were used to dealing with trade shows only, and it was the first time that they all accepted to create something that's not out of their hands. So we came up with these cultural totems of rotating elements again, and here this idea of playfulness and surprise that was coming from a different project that you saw earlier. And it was these elements that are presented in a series of totems that are rotating, and some of them are static. So you had the experience as you go again, as you move around, a sensor was picking up the movement, and some of these pieces were suddenly started to rotating. Again, making them lighter than it looks. They're very heavy pieces. So this blending of illusion elements as something is static, but at the same time it becomes a performative element, is something we realize that we're interested actually in. And lastly, these are a latest project that we developed with a company in Italy called Tacchini. It's a series of mirrors and vases. And this is something we picked up from Eleni we were at their house in Greece before launching this project, and Eleni had these elements from a grandmother at home that she always used to play when she was a kid, and that was the starting point for this. It was this multifaceted elements, like small ashtrays made of glass, that we picked up and started developing into a series of 3-dimensional resin elements that were refracting light, reflecting light, and giving this sense of materiality. So this is the last project. It's an exhibition we did at the Noguchi Museum in New York. We had the chance to have a show at this amazing building by Isamu Noguchi. It wasn't something that we planned. We were in conversation with the museum for a book that we were working with, and then suddenly we received this email with a full curatorial brief of works that we already had. We didn't produce anything new in this exhibition, but the curator pickpointed a project from ours and matched them, paired them with elements from Isamu Noguchi's work as a conversation with the artist. And it's also through these kind of projects that we also see our work in a different way and get to understand what we have been doing and how we improvise and moving forward. That's it. I have another small presentation from our work at Columbia University this semester, if you want to see it. Yeah, quickly, I don't know what time is it. Very good. So this past semester, from January to May, we were invited to teach at the Graduate School of Architecture in Columbia University, the last year of the master's program. And we haven't been at this environment for a long time. And we saw this as an opportunity for us not to do something that we have done before, but to think of what we wanted as students back then to have been our last semester. So the students were a group of 12 in our studio, and most of them had professional experience before, but most of their projects they've done at their time at Columbia were specific briefs. Design this, design that, and explore something specific. We thought of a concept that we wanted to urge them to explore themselves, and it was the last opportunity for them before they go out to the professional world and work for architecture offices or other studios. So we wanted to urge them to find their voice, their identity, and it's something that we realized later on that it should have something we should have done earlier, or we keep doing it, it never stops, but the earlier you start, the more you have this idea of moving forward in your professional life, but then having in back of your head who are you, how this fits into your ideas and your mentality. So we structured the brief around two main references: the radical Italian architecture movement from the 60s, our main kind of like readings were the readings of Super Studio, and Japanese contemporary architecture in the way it's being materialized right now in Japan. And why we did that is because we feel that in the 60s, the radical Italian group was that moment that this group of people were reacting to a specific moment in time, political turbulence and design turbulence. They were all architects, but they ended up not working as architects, most of them, and exploring other mediums, film, architecture, design, installations. And with that way, finding their voice to materialize ideas that they were actually able to produce important works in a very short time. In the contrary, in Japan, what's happening now is that there are projects that appear to be unimaginable, but they are somehow realizable. And I feel that this is one of the few places in the world that there is this kind of freedom of realization of these concepts. Maybe it's cultural, but it's maybe for the Western world it's something that we see as crazy, but it's not. So we structure this concept of giving them three project briefs and create and find their voice, find their identity, create a thesis project, and define their own kind of personal manifesto. And the three projects were a private scale, a semi-public scale, and public scale. So we worked in conceptual level only, schematic design up to there, no details. But it was all structured around how to present at the end. So all the projects were presented as one cohesive presentation from beginning to the end, presenting these three ideas and how these ideas are tied to a specific narrative that each of the students wanted to have. So the semester started with them exploring one of the three scales, I think the semi-public scale, and we gave a loose concept of a club, a place for music, for sensory experience, as a means for kind of like creating freedom and giving your ideas more loose. Also, why? Because also these Italian radical groups, they also produce some of their most important work into this realm. So I'll quickly scroll through some of the projects that the students were working in their first part. They were free to explore this in a conceptual level, in architectural level, but through our conversation, through readings, we were trying to define and identify what for them is their interest and what is their goals of professional goals. And this was a chance for them to explore something that they've never had the chance to explore before. And then we went to Japan for 2 weeks. We saw amazing things. We went to Tokyo, Kyoto, and to Naoshima and Teshima, the art islands, where we explored amazing pieces of architecture, but also drifted and sensed this sense of freedom in creating structures and things that are maybe not easy to see in New York, at least. And we visited important architecture offices where we had tours and discussed a bit these kind of ideas. And then everybody came back, and at the end they developed the other two projects, and they continued developing their manifesto, but again in ways that were not dictated by us on how to use their graphic identity, how to use their conceptual direction. Some of them wanted to do complete buildings, complete architectural projects. Some of them wanted to do more thesis or theoretical elements. And at the end, the production and the presentation was 12 completely different directions from 12 completely different people. That's it.
Hello.
Hi.
That was a lot. So I have maybe a question that, because maybe referring to the first project you show, did a lot of temporary installation, and you were mentioning the fact that some of them were like complex, difficult to manufacture, and etc. What is also regarding resin and these kind of things? What is your position regarding the outcome of the installation? Because I guess that's also what's interesting in lecture, is not to have only the portfolio, but also the question, the backstage, the reflection about what are all this material going through afterwards. And is it present in your process when you do the design? Those reflection on, more sustainability, let's say. As well, I'm questioning like the resin. It's not a material I know really well, but how, what is your position regarding? I guess that's a question you got already, so I'm curious.
The resin regarding also after use of the resin, you mean, or as in?
But in general, like.
So the idea of a temporary installation also always have the fact that it's there for a certain amount of time and then it doesn't go somewhere else. But conceptually, the reuse of an idea somewhere else is something that's against its birth, let's say. A temporary installation for us, it's an immediate reaction to a context, and it's not site specific per se, but it has site specific kind of initiative from us. That said, many of these installations end up going somewhere else. I didn't mention that because it's not the starting point for our work. For example, the inflatable installation now that you saw, the dome, it will be presented together with some other inflatable parts in Chicago Biennale in September. So most of these installations, we do have them still. They might find a place to re-emerge, but not as is. They will be developed together with something else, adapted. We don't know yet, but we don't see the reuse of something as a material reuse. We see it as components, and those components are parts that can be reassembled with new ideas and new components somewhere else. Of course, some of these are not easy to be reused. For example, these arches, the metal arches, this was dismantled and not reused, but it was loaned for a few years to museums around the world. It went to a Museum of Beaux-Arts in Quebec, and then it went to another public location. But then there is a certain moment when this doesn't make sense anymore, because it's not a piece of art that stays somewhere. And so it was dismantled and discarded. Discarded, not thrown away, but the metal was melted, etc., reused. In terms of resin, what's interesting in resin is that you see resin as as a plastic thing. It's a chemical reaction that produces this work. But so it doesn't have a sustainable, let's say, starting point. But what happens is that it is 100% recyclable. So the way we work with resin and the techniques we have developed and inherited actually, and then redeveloped, is that it can be grinded, it can be threaded and reused over and over again because there's no additives in it. So the concept of something that's but also the idea that what we're making out of resin is things that are not supposed to be discarded anyways, things that are there to stay. But all the tests, all the mistakes, all the things that we do, they all go 100% into something that's again and again and again be able to be recasted in molds and reimagined in a different type of object.
Hello, thank you for the lecture. I was just wondering, for you, will idea always come before materiality? Because your objects are obviously crafted very, very well, and you understand materiality also very well. But will it always be idea rather than like, oh, I really feel like you're almost like a craftsman of inflatables now? And when you talk about Japan, it was quite interesting, like why Japan makes these challenging projects possible, but they also really good craftsmen as well. So maybe
so sometimes it's from the idea starts from a material obsession. Sometimes it comes from a concept, and then the concept leads us to what material to use. But this is how it was in the beginning. Of course, as you start working more and more with different materials, and you have a vocabulary of materials that you come back to. This is what happened with inflatable. The first time we started working with inflatable, we wanted this idea of illusion between something that's big and light versus something that's heavy. So the inflatable came in that kind of discussion. In the past, we've done other projects in terms of, again, objects and materials that we were interested in something that seems like it's soft, but it's actually not soft. So this duality of illusion always I started coming back and back, but then now that we have the resin, we don't see that anymore. We have the resin and we have this material that we work with and then we explore. So now this has become, although it started oppositely, but now it started being a starting point on its own and what we can do with that. So it used to come from both ways. Now it comes as well from a library and a vocabulary that we already have.
Hello, nice to meet you. I have a question that whenever you go to the cathedral and the church, you can feel amazing things and very traditional art and very spirit. How do you think about all these like stained glass, stone carving built with modern architecture and installations?
Do you mind repeating the question?
Sorry. I just think about like all this traditional art, especially when you go to the cathedral, you can feel that. Mm-hmm. How do you think about put all this tradition and the very spirit art built with modern architecture and installations?
We were always interested in contemporary art, and a lot of our readings, not references, formal references, but a lot of our readings come from modern architecture, and from artists. So this is, let's say, our kind of like starting point of how we were developed, let's say, how we studied. So we came from these two directions. So contemporary art is always something that we come back and back to it. And then we had this opportunity to work in a book publication about Isamu Noguchi. And this is also something that changed our view, not changed the view of things, but also kind of like formalized some ideas that we thought we had, but then we didn't really realize that, oh, this is what we're doing. So we developed this project of the relationship of Isamu Noguchi with Greece. And we developed a publication. So during the course of this project, we read a lot about Isamu's ideas of craftsmanship, but at the same time touching all these kind of different disciplines: design, architecture, landscape. So in that sense, I don't know if I'm answering your question properly, but it is not that we look into art or these kind of elements in a kind of like a very careful way. It's there in our spectrum of visual spectrum, and it's a conversation back and forth every time we have some kind of thoughts around.
Hi, firstly, beautiful presentation. I think what you presented truly reflected what you were talking about, stacking images and how it's moving. It wasn't very much fixed to the screen. It was quite surprising. So in that respect, I did understand, not experiencing in person, but understood it through your presentation. I was wondering, is there any type of sort of medium that you've used to further expand on that language? Through poetry, photography, it definitely has showed that, how the movement, the lighting, the atmosphere, and the element of surprise. But have you thought about filmmaking in poetry as a way to expand that language?
Thank you first for the comment, because the way the presentation was structured is also to illustrate a little bit that, I don't want to say the term messiness, but the fact that things are not always in an order. So this is the way we think, this is the way we act. We have multiple projects at the same time, and during the course of a day we jump from one to the other in different scales, and we're not messy as people, but we tend to be occupied with many different things. And the reason why I showed the way I showed it is because I wanted to give that feeling. So thanks for pointing that out. Obviously photography, yes, we are interested in photography because as a medium of not documentation, but also expressing feeling. I know that film and video is particularly that, but we haven't done that. And a reason why we haven't done that is that sometimes filmmaking is something, it gives you one specific aspect that you have to very carefully organize it and present it. And it's while in the physical form of an object, structure, and then its photography, there is somehow an idea of this being open-ended, open for interpretation. And I feel that this is what we would like to be doing, because not that we haven't done films, we have, but the films are more in a sense that we want to explain something specific and talk about something specific as a process. For the way to present the work, we would like this to be a little bit more free for anybody else to understand in different ways. I will keep going back to the idea of these two questions because I'm very intrigued. I've never seen it like this, but the reason why you see it like this is this kind of interpretation, which is, in my opinion, very good to happen. Because if we present it in a film, or then we dictate this is how we do it, and maybe we'll do it later, but we haven't thought about that yet. Poetry is not something I'm familiar with, and for that reason, maybe it's not something we have explored. But making and crafting and experimenting with, not with mock-ups and not with like going straight to the final element, it's something that comes out of our very natural from us.
Beautiful. Lastly, with the experience that you receive from your, let's say, users of your spaces, is there any surprise reaction that you got? Maybe that's not how I wanted them to react. Or is there any sort of material that you use that hasn't sort of played to your cards? So say, for example, a material that hasn't responded to a certain design that you envisioned to become?
No, I wouldn't say so. And the reason for that is because we are kind of loose in our expectations. we have high expectations of us when we do, when we think, when we produce, when we elaborate, but we don't have a high expectations of how this will be perceived, because it's not because we don't care, but because we will accept any type of interpretation, and it's just one step part of the process. So we see it as a process, and that's why you see so many things and so many different things, because we want to keep it. It comes natural. It's not intentional that okay, now we do this. It just comes natural. So the improvisation is a bit interest in our process.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
Well, I really didn't expect this to be the conversation, but I expected it to be a great conversation, so I was right. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for sharing so generously all of the amazing, very small and very big things that you have done.
Thank you.